the main impact that we have as Fairphone is the fact that we prolong the usage of the phone. Because of the fact that we support the phone longer, modular design, long-term support, etc., long-term software support, the main impact is really, really better because instead of changing your phone every 3 years, you change your phone every 5, 6, or 7 years. You cut by 44% all the global impact of the phone, environmental impact. We want to make sure that the users will keep their phone longer.
Since 2017, there are more mobile subscriptions globally than inhabitants of our planet. And 80% of them own a smartphone with at least one active SIM card for personal use, with some discrepancies in gender and location, of course. This is a massive market for mobile phones. And last year, 1.2 billion units were shipped, which is a proxy for sales used in this industry. Yes, this is roughly 15% of the world population who bought a smartphone last year. Now, making these 1.2 billion smartphones is not small potatoes when it comes to their environmental impact, with many metals required for the electronics, a lot of them being the so-called rare earth, and a lot of energy and water being used both for extractions and manufacturing. A 250-gram smartphone is often said to have a true weight of 70 kilo. Yes, 70 kilos. If we count all the minerals and fossil fuels required to build them. Some manufacturers try to reduce this footprint via recycling, but the majority of them argue that complex globalized supply chains make it difficult for them to have an impact. And almost none of them promote reusing in the second-hand market. And here comes Fairphone. Founded in 2013, the company claimed to have a focus primarily on ethics and sustainability and to empower its users with easy-to-repair devices. It's a fair statement to say that in the sustainability circles, and especially green IT ones, having a Fairphone is a bit of a badge of honor, I would say, especially if it's second-hand. And yes, I have one as well. But beyond being a tool to send an alternative message, what is really achieved by Fairphone? What are their successes, but also the limits they face? How impactful are we truly when we choose this brand over another? Am I, among many others, guilty of following the hype rather than the metrics? To answer these questions, I'm delighted to welcome Agnes Crepet today. Agnes joined Fairphone more than 7 years ago as the head of software engineering, and her position makes her insight super valuable as she's able to cover both the hardware and software sides of the project. Agnes has been a passionate tech lead for the last 20 years, with the willingness to make tech fairer, long-lasting, privacy-focused, more diverse, and inclusive. Yes, all of this. She's also part of several NGOs, on top of a job, and with her we can expect zero bullshit. So without further ado, welcome Agnes. Thanks a lot for joining Greenire today.
Hello, Gael.
So Agnes, before we start in the environmental impacts of all of this and what Fairphone has managed to achieve or not to achieve yet, just a quick basic question. What is Fairphone? I mean, I've checked the market share, of all big brands for smartphone, and in Q3 2025, 33% of the mobile phones sold were not linked to the top 5 brands, which are Apple, Samsung, Xiaomi, Vivo, and Oppo. So I would like to know how much of the 33% is Fairphone. I guess not that much, but we can still hope. And more generally, where are you, with your different objectives, with your market shares? How is doing Fairphone?
That's a good question. So, indeed, you did say that I joined Fairphone in 2018, so more than 7 years ago. And when I joined Fairphone, we were selling approximately between 20K and 30K phones per year. And it was quite big, right? Because it's not 1K per year, so you can still have impact. You can still sit at the European Commission, right? You are still credible. But 1 or 2 years after I joined, we managed to reach the approximately the 100K phones sold per year, which is for us really, really different because when you reach this volume, It's really, really easier to reach out to some partners within the industry. It's easier to have some institutional partners listen to you also. So yeah, we reached these numbers in 2020, approximately. If I'm not mistaken, it was 94, 95K funds sold per year. And we went above the 100K in 2022. And then since then, that's approximately the number of funds that we sell per year. Last year, it was 103K. But this year, I cannot give you the numbers because we are in December 2025. But I can tell you that it will be much more.
Okay.
Yeah, 120, 130K approximately. I cannot give you the exact number. Why? Because we introduced Fairphone 6, so the last generation. We managed to really, really, I don't know, fit the market. The price was better than Fairphone 5. So yeah, it will be a better number in 2025. That's a good thing. But what I wanted to tell you is regarding what we do, right? Launching a company, a social enterprise with impact, you cannot expect doubling your numbers every 6 months, right? So this is not the same growth as another company. So when we reached the 100K, it was such a milestone that we needed to strengthen a bit this milestone. So this is why it takes time to go over this 100K.
Quick question also about the ownership, because Fairphone is a B Corp, is a social impact company, but who owns Fairphone?
Plenty of people. So we have the people who founded Fairphone. They still have some shares. But in 2023, we wanted to have more money. So we reached to some investors and a consortium of impact investors led by new shareholders like Invest NL. That's like the BPI in France. But I'm not sure if you have a lot of French people listening to this podcast. But new shareholders started to work with us, and they invested almost 50 million in Fairphone. So now that's a mix of different people, but this bunch of new shareholders is quite important for us now. But you still have Miguel Ballester, who is one of the co-founders and who is my close colleague working every day with me. So you still have also the first employees, and you can also have employees running the company.
And the balance of power has shifted toward investor.nl, or is it still pretty well distributed among all those different shareholders?
No, this is quite pretty well distributed. You have, of course, 3 or 4 main ones and then plenty of other ones. You don't have only one. So you have InvestNL, ABN AMRO, Quadia, different bodies.
And to go back to the sales, you rightfully explained that we cannot expect to double every 6 months when you run a B Corp company in the way you run it. But regarding your expectation, what did you manage as a company? What did you manage to achieve? And where did you fail to deliver what you wanted? Because it seems to be pretty big now with big money. I mean, you mentioned 50 millions of euro invested. And I was wondering how resilient regarding the COVID crisis, for instance, Fairphone has proven to be, and if you're still managing to delivering what you want. And of course, we will then shift to the impact itself.
So if you look at our impact reports, right? Every year we publish an impact report where we speak a lot about impact, but also about sales and financials. And of course, right? I mean, like a lot of companies, we were expecting to sell more products in 2020, 2021. But the thing is, if you look at the financial and the revenue, the EBITDA, in 2020 and 2021, we had a positive EBITDA, which is quite good, right, for a company like us. And then we invested a lot of money with the bodies that I mentioned just before, and we launched new products. So in 2022 and 2023, the EBITDA was a bit lower. In 2023, the EBITDA was something like a negative of 14 million. But I cannot say that this is not something that we did not expect, because it was part also of the investment that we wanted to do, right? So in the end, the fact that we have different shareholders, that we are still owning the company, so you still have people like Miguel Ballester, etc., managing the company because he's part of the heads and directors of the company. The targets that we fix are still realistic, both in terms of impact sales and financial. So what I mean is, in the end, we did not have big failures in terms of target, right? Because when we fix something for the next year, we hope to be realistic. Except, of course, during the COVID, where 2 years after we had a decrease. But beside that, we did not fail really, which is really amazing. Also because if you speak about the COVID, I think a lot of people did change their habits in terms of consuming, right? So I think we even took the benefit of people facing big pandemic like the COVID, right, and changing their habits, consuming differently, at least in the Western countries. And we are only selling in Europe, right? Mostly, we have a few projects in the US, but our main sales area is Europe. So, yeah, I have the feeling that the consumers in Europe did change their way of buying things,
which impacted your sales, obviously.
Yeah. Positively.
Excellent. So let's talk now about impact and more specifically the reduction of the environmental impact. My understanding, but please correct me if I'm wrong, of the ecological impact of a smartphone is that it's a lot of pollution, quite significant resource exhaustion, and quite a lot of energy and water being used. Its carbon emissions are also mostly related to the life phases before the use phase, although the exact proportion are linked to the longevity of the device and carbon intensity of the electricity which is used. Among all those negative impacts that I've listed, which of these do you have the most success in mitigating or even reducing?
So just to step back a bit from those numbers, for any smartphone, not only the Fairphones, but if we look at the environmental impact of a smartphone, it's between 70 and 80% of the total impact, which is caused by the production phase, the raw material extraction and the manufacturing. So the main difference for us is the fact that, we work with fair materials, and I can come back on that just after, but fair materials for us, it means virgin materials extracted as usual, I would say, in the mines in Congo, for example, etc. So the impact is more or less the same as the other ones, but we are also focusing on the recycling, the urban mining. So in that sense, when you think about minerals and the abiotic depletion, of course, our impact is bigger on that aspect. But if I step back a bit, the main impact that we have as Fairphone is the fact that we prolong the usage of the phone because of the modularity, because of the repairability. So not focusing only on, this production phase and the fact that perhaps we are better on the abiotic depletion. The thing is, because of the fact that we support the phone longer, modular design, long-term support, etc., long-term software support, the main impact is really, really better because instead of changing your phone every 3 years, as it is more or less the average, right, in Europe, you change your phone every 5, 6, or 7 years. And for that reason, you can decrease the global impact by 44%. This is more or less what we have in our last life cycle assessment. So if you take the average of 7 years versus 3 years, 7 years, this is what we do. 3 years, this is more or less the average for the other phones. You cut by 44% all the global impact of the phone, environmental impact. So that's the main number that you need to think of, because in the end, if we look at only the difference between ecotoxicity, abiotic, global warming, of course we are better than the other phones, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is that we want to make sure that the users will keep their phone longer.
Okay, that's really interesting because you went for a design aspect of the hardware that allow the phone to live longer. And actually, you also choose this way of doing business. So I guess trying to have a lifespan of the device that lasts much longer than the competitors, which might also, going back to the point of the sustainability of your business, my earlier question, create a more difficult condition to sell more units, because obviously if people, they keep their units much longer, you've got a smaller market among the people willing to buy a Fairphone. This design choice, was it planned like this from the very beginning, or was it because you faced some difficulties in reducing the environmental impact during the manufacturing phase that actually you shifted and say, okay, we cannot be like super, super good or the very best student, or maybe you're already the very best student, but our impact is not that different of the others mining cobalt in Congo, as you mentioned. So we're going to actually shift toward having lasting longer products, or was it something designed from day one?
From day one, if I want to be exact, so Fairphone started as an awareness campaign in 2010, and it's only in 2013 that we became a company, and we launched our first phone, the Fairphone 1. And this phone was not modular, right? So if you think about day one was really, really focused on the social aspects. So the tagline of the Fairphone 1 was a seriously cool smartphone that puts social values first. And the main USP of this product was to have the tin and the tungsten conflict free. I don't want to say that we did not have a focus on the environmental aspect, but it was really, really our ambition to speak about the social aspect of the phone. Because at that moment, and to be honest, it did not change that much, nobody was speaking about the social damages behind the phone, right? The mining sector, all the children in the mines in Congo or somewhere else. So it was really, really the focus that we had. But the Fairphone 1 had a removable battery. And if you think about that, at that moment, it was already something a bit different compared to the market. But, just the fact of having a removable battery can help you to not waste your phone after 4 years, because we know that any battery won't last more than 3 or 4 years, right? For any phones, even if you have a phone that you bought, I don't know, 1.5K dollars. So you need to have a way in your phone to change the battery easily, right? And already the Fairphone 1 had this possibility. So we had in mind already that keeping your phone longer would also help the whole company to have less impact, speaking about the environmental impacts or the social impact. And it's only with the Fairphone 2 in 2015 that we introduced this modularity. And this is from that moment. Why the modularity? Because we knew already that the modularity, the fact that you can keep your phone longer, has much more impact compared to shifting, I don't know, the tantal by a ceramic or whatever. But yeah, I mean, in the end, it was more or less the focus of our R&D to find a way to repair the phone, to give to the users the possibility to change the screen, the battery, some stuff that easily break, right? I mean, how many people did you see with a broken screen? A lot, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And why people keep their phone with this broken screen? Because this is not easy to remove it, to change it, or because this is super expensive. So yeah, from day one or day two, we had in mind to prolong the usage of the phone for sure, because we knew that it was the domain that we had to focus on to have the most impact.
So that's wow. There are so much to unpack here, but so if I follow your chain of thought and what you've shared with us regarding Fairphone experience, you started first focusing on blood metal. That's the promise was that people won't have blood on their hand, if pun intended. But that was not a focus from the environmental perspective from day one. It shifted with Fairphone 2, I got it. And you mentioned that most of the effort was put on making the phone last much longer. And we're going to dive into it because I guess it's also very well related to the software part of things where you are the expert. Is it a fair statement to say that Fairphone didn't invest that much R&D into changing one metal per another or using recycling metals from urban mining, for instance? Or is there still one or two success stories that you can share about reducing at the manufacturing phase the environmental footprint?
As you mentioned before, and as I mentioned also before today, our focus is both on the environmental aspect and the social aspect. And if you think about recycling, the interesting thing is we know that focusing on recycling is not only good for the environment, but also good for the people, because you can have the same damages behind recycling compared to the virgin mining, right? So you have also can see kids, right? In Ghana, for example, where you have the lot of e-waste, you have a lot of informal recycling, even more than the formal recycling. So we know that we have a lot of issues. So one of the success story of Fairphone is indeed, I don't want to say that we switched, but compared to 5 years ago, we have more focus on recycling. We know that it's not easy to recycle the materials within the phone. 20 to 35% of the materials is lost when the phone is melts down for recycling, for example. So we know that technically it's not easy. Of the metals in your phone, half have a functional recycling rate of less than 50%. So we know that only focusing on recycling won't solve the story, right? And also it's not good because we want to still focus on the fair mining, the virgin mining, because we still have a lot of social issues. But we started 4 years ago to focus more on the recycling because it's good to find a way to help the people, to support the people working on the informal recycling. And it's also good for the environmental impact. So now, if you look at the report that we publish, that we open publish, we have, so just small words on the materials that we work on at Fairphone. We work approximately on 50% of the metals of the fund, and we choose those metals based on a certain governance, right? So we check if this metal, for example, has a big environmental issues, social issues. If we have a depletion of this metal, blah blah blah. Is this metal is used in the rest of the industry? If we can have easily ourselves impact on these metals, blah blah blah. And when we choose those metals, then we can decide if we focus more on the recycling side of things or the fair mining, the virgin mining. And now we have metals like aluminium, for which we are almost only focusing on recycling. Copper, aluminium, indium, magnesium, those kind of metals. And I mean, I cannot give you now all the details about that because we need 2 additional hours. We would need 2 additional hours. But for sure, when you work with recycling metals, it's obviously better for the environmental footprint of the fund. But that's not the main reason. This is what I mean, right? That's also because we know that we can have impact on the social damages of this extraction.
So, Agnes, if I follow your story here, I see some sort of a pattern that actually Fairphone was not meant from day one to be an environmental champion, but rather a social champion. And here again, your focus for positive social impact with the support of the informal urban mining. So it's basically e-waste being recycled by informal workers, led you to significant results also in the reduction of the environmental footprint. Is it fair to say that this is history repeating itself again?
I mean, I was not at the beginning of Fairphone, but I'm sure that even if the focus was on the social aspect at the beginning, of course, right, the environmental aspects were not too far, right? Because it go hand in hand, meaning that if we manage, for example, I told you that if we extend the lifespan of a phone, then it's good for the environment, right? But it means also that if you do that, of course, you will theoretically produce less phone per year, right? Not only as Fairphone, but if you think about the whole industry, the 1.4, 1.3 billions of phones sold every year could be reduced if all of us, all the manufacturers are doing the same thing. And of course, if we all do that, this is better for the people because you would have less pressure on the mining sector in the DRC. You will have less issue with kids in the mining sector, blah, blah, blah. So For me, it's really, really related. What I wanted to say is, indeed, at the beginning, we were quite focused on the social aspect because we were not a company. During 3 years, we were, the people at the beginning of Fairphone were really, really launching was awareness campaign, not building a fund, right? So it was not a company. It was only a company in 2013. But this is a bit to answer your question about the replacement of one metal. I'm not saying that we should not focus on that, but we are sure that this is not the main focus to have right now, because you cannot expect to have a big impact only thinking about the replacement. This is a bit techno-solutionist approach. And we think that we should have a more systemic approach. And the systemic approach, of course, embraces the both sides, right? Both of the sides, the social side and the environmental side.
And yet you managed to achieve, it's very interesting. You managed to achieve, you mentioned aluminium, you mentioned tin results, but being led first by social criteria and with this positive spill out. Now, maybe it's time to talk about how you manage to reduce the software obsolescence, because if you design a phone to last for more years than usual, of course, there is the way we design the hardware. You mentioned the removable battery, the easiness to repair the screen, another example you took, but there is a lot of software-induced hardware obsolescence. And you're actually the team lead on these topics. So what did you do? How did you manage to get the software working hand in hand with the hardware to have a smartphone which lasts much longer? Because you mentioned lasting for minimum 6 to 7 years.
And the last 2 phones that we launched, the Fairphone 5 and the Gen 6, we promised 8 years, so it's even more. Just to explain a bit what is happening on your phone. So I'm sure that a lot of you, and perhaps you, Gail, you have seen this message on your phone, an app no longer being compatible with your phone, right? Recently, I had a friend who has shown me an issue with Amélie, the app of Amélie. This is a social insurance in France. And she's not able to use Amélie anymore in her phone because of this app not working on her old iPhone. So you can think that, okay, not for Amélie, but for an app, you can say, okay, perhaps I will contact the developers to see if they can do something. But of course, I'm doubting that they will make it compatible, because this is quite, I would say, straightforward to think that it's not good for an app to run on a system which is not up to date. So this use case means that the app is no longer compatible with the operating system of the phone, and probably this operating system is not receiving any security patches anymore. That's the issue. So Amélie, a bank app or whatsoever, of course, will not run on an unsecured phone. And that's the issue. The issue is to make sure that you will have an up-to-date operating system running on your phone forever, for 8 years. And of course, if I think about Android, right, Android 8, Android 9, Android 10, guess how many years this version of Android, so Android 10, for example, will last? Guess, Gail. This is for me now to ask a question. It's okay if you don't know, but just do you have...
I would say around 4 years, but I might be over-expecting.
Yeah, it's more 3, but you were not that far. So if you launch a phone with Android 7, it means that, and if you want to keep it longer, so if you want to, as a manufacturer, if you make the promise of maintaining this phone for 7 years or 8 years, it means that at least you will need to do 2, 3, or 4 Android upgrades, right? Because one Android version will not cover the whole lifespan of the phone. And the issue is to do that. So the first upgrade, generally speaking, is quite okay. And of course, like a lot of manufacturers, we do an upgrade every year, at least the first years, right? Because also people like the new features of new Android version, etc. And it's also good for the security aspect. So let's say that every year we, as a phone manufacturer, we update the operating system. The first year is okay, the second year is okay. And perhaps from the third year, you can start to have issues. And why? Why? Because if you think about the phone as a system, you have plenty of subsystems. Android itself is running on the CPU of the SoC, of the chipset, but of course you have plenty of other components, right, which are required to make sure that you can run Android on your phone. If I step back a bit, in a phone you have 200 components, right? And I'm not saying that all of them are required to run Android, but some of them are quite important. So the chipset itself, right, the processor of the phone for sure, but also the fingerprint sensor, for example, the camera, the NFC. So all of them, they are quite important, at least for Android. So if you switch from Android 10 to Android 11, Android 12, Android comes with new requirements about security, for example, about biometric security. So if you want to upgrade from Android 10 to Android 11, you have the chance of being obliged as a manufacturer to update also the firmware that runs on top of your fingerprint sensor, right? Otherwise, you cannot upgrade to the new Android version because you are not fulfilling all the requirements required by the new Android version. So that's the key of the issues when you want to upgrade to a new version as a phone manufacturer. And this is why, I don't want to say this is why, but it can explain why a lot of manufacturers are not doing the upgrades along the years. Even if we know that now at the European level, the manufacturers are obliged to do long-term support 5 years after the end of sales. But still, right, if I zoom out and if I think the phones worldwide, for sure, this is quite ambitious to do 8 years of software support because it means that during several years, you need every year to do an Android upgrade, making sure that even the firmware running on your NFC, on your fingerprint sensor, is up to date. And technically, most of the time, as a phone manufacturer, you are not the one writing the software running on top of your fingerprint sensor. So it means that when you launch a new phone, you need to make sure that you have all the agreements in place with those components manufacturers, vendors, right? To make sure that they will be with you for 8 years. Alors, it's not like we do only that for the support, right? The software support. At Fairphone, we are also making a big promise when it comes to spare parts, right? So we want to make sure that the users who are buying a Fairphone will have spare parts. So if we say that we have a repairable phone, for sure you need to have spare parts for the long term, right? 10 years. So we are making sure that we will have the spare parts for the long run. So we need anyhow to have those agreements in place with the vendors, right? But on top of just buying them, their components for the long run, we need also to make sure that we'll have the right support from them, software-wise, for 8 years, to make sure that we will be able to do all the security updates and also the Android upgrades. So that's quite a challenge. But we are Fairphone, 160 people, and we managed to do that, right? For Fairphone 2, we were the only manufacturer doing 7 years of software support way before the moment where the European Commission decided to push the constraints for manufacturers to do this long-term support. So it's possible. Technically, it's possible. You just need to have this ambition as a manufacturer to do this long-term support. Because of course, right? I mean, when you have a long-term support on your phone, when you have a solution to repair your phone easily, you don't sell a phone every year to the users, right? So that's really, really the business model behind what we do, which is different. And of course, when it comes to software, I explained a bit to you the bottleneck that we have and how we solve them. That you need first to have this ambition to tackle this obsolescence, to make sure that you don't sell a new phone every year to your consumers.
It seems that what you just described is more on the legal side than the technical side. And here is why. As you rightfully mentioned, I was about to ask you the question. As you rightfully mentioned, you don't develop the huge majority of the firmware. It's part of the stuff that you buy with a chip, with a finger sensor and the likes. So how do you manage to secure this long-term relationship with these providers? Because there are two issues at stake here. So delivering updated firmware over 8 years, but also you mentioned the spare parts, but there is also this question of having accessible spare parts. By accessible, I mean not crazy expensive, because that's quite often what we see also. Oh yeah, you can record your smartphone. We have the screen as a spare part and it costs 50% of the price of the smartphone being used. So is it more like your legal department running it, or is there also a big chunk of tech being involved? How do you manage to secure this partnership?
So that's a mix of people. Of course, we have a legal department, we have a procurement department, and we have also the engineers, and all of us, we are involved, right? When it comes to negotiate those partnership for the long run. But of course, sometimes you need, as an engineer, you need to be a bit more involved because you can find some workaround, right? So if the agreement is not the best way to solve an issue, perhaps you can also convince, and this is also our approach as Fairphone, to change the industry from the inside out. You can also convince the manufacturer, this vendor, to open source Fairphone. And now I will speak about this second side of the story, because of course I did not mention yet that open source is key. For sure, open source is key to maintain your phone longer. So we are collaborating with a lot of open source communities to make sure that they can use our software and they can elaborate their own software to publish their own operating system. And this is not only good for the longevity, but also for the privacy, because you can have an operating system like, I don't know, Calyx OS, COS, LinearOS, with more privacy focused, right? And we have even OSs like Postmarket OS or Ubuntu Touch based on Linux and not on Android anymore. So we are really, really embracing the open source for both of those reasons, on longevity and privacy. But if I focus only on longevity, for sure, when we publish this code source, we can have some support from the community also to unlock the obsolescence. So it happened in the past that we were relying on some commit from other developers, not from Fairphone. So that's also the beauty of open sourcing. And what kind of negotiation we do with the partners, just to make the link between the both sides of the stories, right? We need to make sure that we publish the right things for the open source developers. You need to do some stuff. You need to have the build instructions. You need to have everything that will make the developer's life easier, right? And you need also to publish what we call the device tree, which is something important for the developers to have the right description of the hardware and to compile the thing as they want to do. And this is something that we did negotiate with the chipset manufacturer, for example, to make sure that he's okay if we can publish this device tree. So, sometimes we use the open source aspect to also convince the manufacturers, the vendors, to unlock the software obsolescence.
And what will be the interest of these vendors to open the code of their own firmware?
It depends. If I speak about Qualcomm, so the chipset manufacturer, they do a lot of open sourcing already. They have some directors of open sourcing, so it's not like it's new for them. And it's like, Google. Google is maintaining IOSP for a while, so, it was also their approach to open source part of Android, not the whole layers of Android, but still. And why? I don't want to answer for them, but we all know that open sourcing is good for the adoptions, right? So you can have a lot of people choosing your software components for this. And it's good also for the security aspect of things, because you can have a lot of people who can looking at your software and raising security issues. So you have plenty of advantages of doing open sources. But I want to mention that even bodies like the chipset manufacturer, vendor, is doing open sourcing because, it says a lot, right? And they have their own interest to do that. And when we approach them to ask them if they are willing to do so, of course, sometimes it takes time, but it's not like they discover open sourcing. But it's good to be a body. Again, the approach of Fairphone is to change the industry, to make it fairer from the inside out. it's not only an MVP, it's a it's a product that can show to the rest of the industry that it is possible to have a safe business model, right? To be viable in this world with this target of making the industry fairer and more ethical. So being from the inside out, it helps also the other bodies like the chipset manufacturer to realize that, okay, you have manufacturers like them and it could be great to promote open source, for example, to make sure that they can do their job properly. And at Fairphone, we do also a lot of lobbying, right? So we were a lot of some lobbying. We were involved in those kind of conversation about the eco-design directive and in France with the index of repairability, index of durability. And for sure, right, what we do can push the institution to make the law, right, in the direction of more sustainability. So this long-term support is really, really a big thing, a big milestone for us because we were doing that before and now this is in the law in Europe. And then it's even easier for the other manufacturers because now it's in the law and for the chipset vendor, same story, right? It's part of the law now to have this.
I was about to ask you the question, how do you measure the impact you have on changing the industry from within, as you said? And so one of the examples is obviously that you successfully lobbied for ambitious law on eco-design and so on. But do you also have some examples to share of manufacturers starting to do things the way you used to do them, or you have been doing them for quite a long time? Do you have some success story like Apple or Samsung saying, oh, actually, we're going to do a bit like Fairphone?
Yeah, I will share a failure and then a success story. I know that you like failures also.
Yeah, because it's always very nuanced. It's always very nuanced. I'm always suspicious of the success stories with no failures and everything is shiny.
No, yeah, plenty of failures, but of course. One interesting example. I step back a bit from software and I will speak about the other impact areas. I mentioned the materials, right? We do a lot of stuff on the materials, rethinking materials, using more recycling sources and working on the fair materials on the virgin mining to make the mining sector fairer. But we work also with the factories, right? And we have plenty of actions within the factories to make sure that the working condition are better. And one of the main aspects, by the way, on that is to make sure that the workers can speak out and can also share with us and with their directors what they call the best working condition. And part of the big thing for them, after a lot of discussion that we have with them, is the wage, right? So they want to have a better wage. Because when you have a better wage, you don't overwork, right? You don't work 80 hours per week, but more 50 hours per week. So Fairphone was quite engaged on what we call ensuring a living wage to the people assembling the smartphone, right? We started that with Fairphone Factory, so several years ago. And you just need to realize that you have a big gap between the living wage and the actual wage. So sometimes the gap is 100%, right? So as a workers, right, if you want to work less, generally speaking, you need to earn the double of what you earn currently. And we have done that. So we paid the bonus to make sure that the workers could have the living wage. And it costs less than $2 per smartphone that we sell. So this is nothing, right?
Okay, that says something about how the wealth creation is distributed when you sell a smartphone. But just bouncing back on what you just said, correct me if I'm wrong, but Fairphone smartphones are assembled in China. Is it correct?
Yeah.
How do you manage to have open access in a country where it is not a democracy and free speech, I would say, is not the most shared right?
Because we have employees in China, so that's a big thing, right? To make sure that the employees will be with the workers to collect their feedback and to have a process in place to collect their feedback. We have, when you have an RFQ, a process for collecting the sharing the requirements that you need for your future product with some partners, some factories, right? Of course, we have this clearly written down that we need this process in place to assess the quality of the work of the people and to assess how we can improve all together the quality of their work. And to come back on those $2, right? So in the end, it is nothing. We did implement that for all the products in Fairphone 3. The failure is on the fact that we launched a living wage campaign. We did write a report to explain to other manufacturers how they can implement living wages, right? So we have developed a toolkit with guides that explain what is living wage, how you can implement living wages in the supply chain, a tool to calculate what the living wage product price premium is, and even a template for an agreement to distribute the living wage premium to workers, everything, right? The failure is we did not convince the other manufacturers, like the other brands. That's the failure. But the success is within the supply chain, meaning the sub-suppliers that we have, like the vibration motor, the battery, etc. We did convince them to implement the living wage. And in terms of impact, just to close the question, you asked me how we measure that. We know that we count the people impacted by our programs, living wage and other stuff. And since the beginning of Fairphone, this is 120K people who benefited from our program. So that's quite a lot. But of course, if you think about the millions of people working in the industry, we can continue our effort for sure, right? But we won't solve the equation ourselves, right? We won't solve the equation ourselves. Why we spend time doing lobbying? Why we spend time doing those campaigns to push other competitors to do the living wages? Because that's the DNA of Fairphone. We want to push the rest of the industry to act more responsibly. So the solution is not to have only Fairphone doing the things better, but we have to push the rest of the industry.
Actually, that's a very good point, because you mentioned that your suppliers, some of them actually implemented the living wage. Now, my question is, did they implement the living wage only for the portion of the production they sell to Fairphone, because you agreed to pay a bit more for their products? Or do you believe that the living wage was implemented across all their chains and for all their their clients?
It really depends. Of course, ideally speaking, we would like them to implement that for everyone. But I remember a story, I don't know if it was for Fairphone 3 or Fairphone 4, but we paid the living wage. For Fairphone, it's for the people, for our workers, the people working for our production line. And I remember a story where the people decided, the workers themselves, to share this bonus with the rest of the company. So sometimes it doesn't come from the direction, but from the bosses of the company, of the vendor, right? But sometimes it comes also from the workers. But we don't have the same culture. We don't, it's not at all possible to compare how it works in China compared to how it works in Europe. But it really depends.
And quick, stupid question. Did you experience a better quality from the product delivered, like a higher passing rate or whatever, because people were better paid and had to work less? That is supposed to be related, or was it negligible?
Yeah, that's a good question, but it's difficult to answer this question because, of course, right, Fairphone is growing and the quality of our product is also growing. So we did onboard a lot of people internally at Fairphone on the quality side of things. So, of course, the quality of our product is really, really better than compared to 8 years ago. But is it related to the worker representation and all the program that we have, all the worker management committee? I don't know, to be honest. But for sure...
to extract might be a challenge, that for sure.
Yeah, but for sure, right? Having all those programs in place, the anonymous grievance channel, the worker representation, etc., of course, it helps to create engagement, for sure. But we did not measure that.
Okay, that is fascinating. I think I've still got like 500 questions in stock for you. However, being mindful of your time, actually, I'd like to zoom out a bit, and you did it several times, but this time we're going to zoom out even a bit more. And these are the last questions I really wanted to ask you. So you're also part of several NGOs, as I mentioned in the introduction. One of them is Le Mouton Noir, which could be translated... One of them is Le Mouton Digital, which could be translated in the digital sheep. And yeah, it's a community trying to step back from all the hype regarding technology and see whether it has truly a positive impact or not on society. And having this hat on rather than the Fairphone's hat, I would love to hear what aspects of this reduction of negative impacts, both from social and environmental perspectives, cannot be tackled by Fairphone alone, cannot be tackled by a company alone. Because you mentioned several times we are trying to change the industry from within, but there is a complete systemic game at play here with a very strong ties between business and technology. So my question would be, what are the limits of what Fairphone can try to achieve on its own?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's interesting that you mentioned the Mouton Numérique, because indeed this is quite an interesting NGO. We work on the challenges posed by the technology to our societies, but not only thinking about the product that some companies are delivering. We would like to have people collectively think about the impact of this technology, and not only the expert, to follow a bit the idea of Ivan Illich, this philosopher from Austria. And ideally speaking, a bit like, by the way, what we have done with Fairphone at the beginning, the awareness campaign about conflict minerals, etc. We think at the Mouton Numérique, and that's also the approach of Fairphone, by the way, that we can solve all those issues only via a systemic approach, right? This is the point one. With Le Mouton Numérique, it goes a bit broader, because, of course, we also think that tech is politic, right? So we challenge the notion that tech alone can drive our world forward by showing that tech is inherently political and ignoring that has serious consequences. At Fairphone, we don't speak a lot about that, right? But I personally think that behind a lot of big tech, you have political projects that can be serious and that can damage the people and the planet. And then to come back on Fairphone, there is plenty of aspects that we cannot solve alone and that we cannot touch also, right? If you think about China, so we want to be where the industry is. And speaking about the assembly lines, a majority of them are still in China. So this is why we want to improve the working condition of the people in China working on the assembly lines. But you have one thing, I didn't speak about that because it's a bit related to the working condition of the people there. But in China, you have one system called the Huku. I'm not sure if my pronunciation is good, but this is a system of registration used by the government. So if you are born in the countryside, you will have a Huku from the countryside. And if you are born in a city, you have a different Huku, right? Huku from the urban areas. And it's a big difference because even if you migrate to a city, and we all know that a lot of workers migrate from the countryside to the city to work in those kind of big factories, right? But even if you migrate, you keep your Yuko. So you keep the Yuko from the countryside. And it doesn't give you the same advantages. Speaking about education, health, blah, blah, blah. And on this, it's really difficult for Fairphone to have an impact. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we speak about systemic law, systemic programs in place and created by the government. Yeah, that's typically something on which we don't have impact. And perhaps when we will grow, when we will sell more fun, because we think we are at ease, saying that if we sell more fun, it's also good for the impact. If at one point we have more sales, meaning more impact, perhaps we can have access to those kind of governmental choice like we have in Europe, right? I told you that we were quite involved in the index of repairability and the index of durability in France or the eco-design directive, but in China, not at all, right? So.
It makes sense. And you mentioned a repairability index several times. Another question regarding the limits, and thanks a lot for sharing those about the Uku. How much can Fairphone truly push for reusability and basically people keeping their smartphones for even longer than 10 years without not challenging its own business model? How much of a progressive company can you be until reaching some business limits, if any?
We sell 100K, a bit more, phones per year, right? You mentioned at the beginning, or I mentioned, I don't remember, that 1.3, 1.4 billions of phones are sold every year. So we have a lot of market shares to take. So there is no real limit. And for sure, we will not change this. This meaning building a fairer and more ethical phone, because we think that this is key. And it's not like, oh, the day that we will reach 1 million phones sold every year, we will reduce all the impact. I mean, I've been working at Fairphone for almost 8 years, 7.5 years, and I did not see any negative changes. Even if we had more investors or blah, 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 we still have this governance of fighting the norms. And that's really, really something huge. This is why I decided to, at one point, to move to the Netherlands with my whole family. Now I'm back to France. But I mean, that's really, really a unique project, right? And inherent to and connected to the business model. It cannot be separated, right? And we really think that you have a lot of people, not only in Europe, but willing to embrace it. The fact that you can keep your phone longer, etc. The marketing obsolescence is real, but I'm quite sure that more and more people are conscious about that and willing to keep their phone longer. If you think about the washing machine, it's really more ethical. Huh? You have a lot of more products which are built to last longer. And so it doesn't come to your mind to change your washing machine every 2 years, right? So why for your phone?
But washing machine is not a statutory object. You don't show it to your friends or...
No, for sure. You don't have the same marketing also. You don't have the same aggressive marketing
absolutely.
To push you to change it every year.
And maybe a more personal question, because you were very passionate when you mentioned the mining in Congo, the working condition in China, etc. Did you experience it yourself? I mean, was it part of a Fairphone onboarding journey to visit some factories, have discussion with, on site with partners, or is it more things that you experienced remotely because you've read some documentaries or you've got some internal trainings at Fairphone?
Yeah. For the assembly line, for sure, right? I went several times to China. I'm used to go to China at least once a year to visit the suppliers and to convince them to to do the long-term support. I'm quite focused on the software engineering for sure, but of course, right? It doesn't mean that I don't know what is happening in the factory. But I'm not part of the impact team, the impact innovation team in charge of pushing for the living wages, blah blah. But I did witness myself those working conditions for sure. We have also employees in China, right? So I'm in close contact with some colleagues who are living in China, so they can also share what they are facing every day. For Africa, it's a bit different because I'm personally, as an engineer, I am a bit far away from the minerals, but of course we have employees from Fairphone going in different countries of Africa, for sure. One of the previous person in charge of that went several times to Tanzania to work with the people in the mining sector. For sure, it's not part of your onboarding because you cannot, we think also about the carbon footprint, so we cannot invite everyone to move to visit Africa or China, but for sure, you have a lot of people at Fairphone who did visit those countries, yes. We are still small, huh? We are growing, but we are less than 200 people, so.
I could feel that you were talking about things that you've experienced yourself at some point. It was this little vibe in your voice. But anyway, okay. And just to close the podcast on, as usual, a positive note, I'm going to ask my usual question. Would you like to share a positive piece of news regarding sustainability? Maybe tech sustainability, but you don't necessarily have to. But what recently motivated you to say, hey, yeah, well, we're still on the right path?
Yeah, recently this year, I wanted to say last year, but this year, June 2025, the Eco Design Directive for sure, right? So it is in place in June, and it will push all the manufacturers to do the long-term support 5 years after the end of sales and the spare parts, blah, blah. So that's really, really some. Of course, it can improve, right? I was recently at the Assemblée nationale in France to explain that we should do more, right? Even speaking about this directive, because you have also an index of durability connected to this directive, and this index doesn't include the price of the spare parts, for example, which is crazy for me. So I was in front of all the people in the Assemblée nationale saying, yeah, you should take into account this price, blah, blah. So I'm still fighting, but this is a big milestone because it means that, we were not alone pushing for that, because we are also part of the right to repair movement in Europe, right? We are not doing that alone, but for sure, when you sit at the European Commission or in France, for example, with the governments to speak about the index of repairability, you have one seat per company. So I have one seat, Agnes Crepet, and Apple has one seat, and Samsung has one seat. So even if we are smaller, we can have, potentially speaking, the same impact towards the people who are making the law. That's huge for me.
Okay, so that's reassuring. And I think we can close the podcast on this very positive news that sometimes some good laws are passed and they will hopefully have a long-lasting effect. Thanks a lot, Agnes, for joining. It was a very fruitful discussion. I didn't expect to talk that much about the ethical and social impacts and the way they lead actually environmental impact. So that just for this, it was super interesting, and for many other topics as well. So thanks a lot for joining Green.io today.
Thanks, Gael.
Thank you for listening to this Green.io episode. Because accessible and transparent information is in the DNA of Green.io, all the references mentioned in this episode are in the show notes. You can find these notes on your favorite podcast platform and, of course, on our website green.io.tech alongside the full transcript. We are going to take a small end-of-year celebration break, and we will be back in 2026 with amazing guests such as Ronak, a former Chief Sustainability Officer in a European unicorn, several speakers at Green.io Paris, and the one and only Jerry McGovern, who will talk about his next book. Meanwhile, share this episode and rate it on your podcast platforms. Yes, it makes a true difference, and it will be a nice Christmas gift for the team and I. And of course, you know that Green.io is more than a podcast, so catch up with the latest release of our monthly newsletter and check the conferences we organize across the globe in 2026. Paris was massive last week, and ticketing is already open for Singapore, New York, Munich, and Amsterdam. As a Green.io listener, you can get a free ticket to any Green.io conferences using the voucher Green.io VIP. Just make sure to have one before the 30 free tickets per conference are all gone. Dear fellow responsible technologists, I'm looking forward to being by your side again in 2026 and helping you build a greener digital world.
One bite at a time.